Welcome back. This is the first tutorial where we discuss a contract type, the principal at maturity, or the PAM, in detail. We could call it the mother of all contract types. Actually, the discussion will go only to a certain level of detail, wherefore we speak of a proto-PAM. It's a kind of prototype, a simple version of the PAM. The main version will be done with where we discuss each contract type in detail. So the proto-PAM is the most simple financial transaction imaginable. Money market transactions, at least in the European version of it, are this kind, where a creditor pays a cash flow to a debtor and the debtor pays it back after a while with some interest. In order to understand the content and especially the context of this tutorial, it is essential that you have listened to UFA lectures 1 and 2 and 3. Having listened to the tutorials 01 and 02 is surely also of some help, but not a real precondition. Financial contracts settle the exchange of cash flows between two counterparties over time. Given this, it is obvious that time, like in so many other facets of life, plays an important role. Therefore, before starting to talk about the proto-PAM, we have to talk about time. What I present here are the most basic issues on time. More about time will follow. These basic issues are, however, of utmost importance and therefore essential to be understood. The very first thing that happens for a contract to become interesting for analysis is to agree on the deal. The day of the handshake, we call this the contract deal date, or short CDD. This date is for Actus the signal that the deal has been done and we are in the risk. Remember, a proto-PAM is a simple deal where two parties agree to have a simple cash flow exchange. The exchange of the first cash flow from the creditor to the debtor usually does not happen right at the moment of agreement. Usually it happens a few days later at the initial exchange date, or IED. I think you understood already that we like talking in short forms. Why we like talking in short forms, you will understand very soon. There are so many variables with long and difficult to pronounce names. IED is always bigger or equal than CDD, so in the extreme it could also be the same and coincide with CDD. After having exchanged the initial cash flow, there is an agreed period of the loan till maturity date. This is the prime sequence of dates for fixed income instruments. We have first CDD, or contract deal date, followed by IED, initial exchange date, and the deal closes at MD, or maturity date. These dates are in a strict order, where CDD must be smaller or equal IED, which in turn must be smaller or equal MD. Let's apply what we have learned to our proto-PAM. The picture shows this principle of maturity, the simple principle of maturity. We have a CDD at the 5th January. You see that here. So the dates are always written in year, month, day. This was the date we agreed to enter the deal, and we have an associated risk. The initial cash flow happens some days later at IED, here, which in our case is the 17th of January, which you can see from here. The red arrow indicates a principal or a capital flow. So this part here is a capital flow, the red full arrow. An arrow that points up indicates an outflow. Since the first cash flow is an outflow, it must be an asset for the person describing the deal. The size of the arrow indicates the amount, which can be seen from the left scale here, this scale here. It's the principal scale. And is 1,000 in our case. The red horizontal dashed line here indicates the notional. Note also the notional before, you see it down here, which is obviously 0, since nothing has been paid at that time. 3 months later, on the 17th of April, the loan is repaid. The arrow is pointing down, indicating an inflow. This simple deal includes a single interest payment paid at the maturity of the deal. So at the same date here we have also an interest payment. This is indicated by a dark green arrow. You see it a little bit behind here. It's green, but because there are 2 arrows, so they overlap, so they are not easily visible, but you will see it much easier in the following graphs. This is only a representation problem. The amount of 12.5 here, and here on this scale we see the interest payment, so it's 12.5 here, and it's 3 months. So that indicates a rate of 5%. The dashed green line here shows the accrued interest, a number used in many instances of financial calculus. Being itself not a direct contract event, it is dashed, like the notional. An interesting date is yet AD0. This here, which in this example is between CDD and IED. AD0 denotes the analysis date, the date from where we look at our transaction. In this case, it is before IED, which means we are looking at the forward deal. We are still in the forward phase, which most deals have, even if it's a short one. The deal has been executed already at CDD. All cash flows are already fixed, therefore we are already at risk. However, all cash flows, including the first, will happen in future. We just saw the simplest possible financial contract expressed in graphical form. It is the right time to get acquainted with the notations used. There will be more coming, and we will explain them incrementally. These are the rules so far. So a dark red solid line indicates a capital or principal cash flow. A dark green solid line indicates an interest payment. An arrow pointing up, like this one, is an outflow seen from the perspective of the entity doing the analysis. Since an outflow for the creditor is an inflow for the debtor and vice versa, we have to know which view we are taking. Taking a closer look at the contract data, you will find an attribute called LEIRC, which stands for Legal Entity Identifier of the Record Creator. This is the entity doing the analysis whose view we take. So logically, an arrow pointing down here is an inflow. This would be an inflow. This is an outflow. And the same is true for the principal arrow. So any arrow pointing up is out, every arrow pointing down is in. Dashed lines, like when we saw accrual, so where here, that was the accrual. That was the interest payment cash flow here. So dashed lines, they show a state. The same we saw also for the notional. This is important information for further analysis and therefore useful, but it does not describe the cash flow as such, therefore dashed. What we see here is the same information as in the previous graph, however in tabular form. This is only an excerpt indicating the most important information. This table corresponds to the middle line of our famous graphic, so it corresponds to this part here. What we can see in the table is the fact that events are just the execution of the contractual terms along the timeline. It's like the lawyer that wrote the contract would read out to the involved parties what is happening and when. The lawyer would say, today is the 5th of January, and we will agree or sign the deal on January 10th. Nothing really happens there, therefore all the events show like 0 here. But on the 17th of January, we will exchange the principal at initial exchange date, and the principal is 1,000. And to the person here talking to, it will mean you have to pay 1,000. And it would say on the 17th of April, an interest has to be paid of 12.5. And on the same date, the contract matures and the thousands will flow back. These here are additional information important for accrual, calculation, and such things. What we look at here is what we call rock bottom of finance. There is nothing below. This is the maximum knowledge we can get. Therefore, once we have reached this level, we can build up any analysis we want, which will be the green part, which is explained elsewhere. So once we have that, we can go to the next step here, which then are all these types of analysis, which are the real reports people will see. In this simple example, most events are simple cash flow related events. We could be seduced to call this line here just cash flow events. Why then do we call it contract events, which is more difficult to explain to the outsider? Only in this simple example we find such a close relationship between contract events and cash flows. We will see with the upcoming, more complex examples that there will be many other contract events that are not cash flows. Actually, we see already one important event in our table, which is not the cash flow, the CDD event. The CDD event is an important signal for the analysis, but not the cash flow as such. There are many events impacting financial analysis that are not directly cash flows. For this reason, the contract event level is very crucial. And for this reason, it's called contract events, not cash flows. What is true, however, all events finally determine the cash flows. For example, the CDD event determines that there will be cash flows at all in the future. Since all events eventually determine the cash flows in the future, we could also call this line cash flow drivers. Thank you for listening to this lecture.